I want to take a moment and respond to some of the comments that have popped up on a recent video I posted about the problem of evil. I made the argument that the moment someone raises an argument from evil, they're actually assuming God exists. Basically, in order for objective evil to exist in the first place, a personal source that defines good and evil must exist. In other words, God. Now, there was a recurring theme in the responses to that video of folks saying they weren't actually claiming evil exists. They were just making an internal critique of Christianity. In other words, they're just saying there's a logical incompatibility between two of Christianity's claims. One, that the Christian God exists, and two, that evil exists. They don't necessarily think either of those statements are true, mind you, but Christians believe both. So if there's a logical incompatibility between them, then Christians believe two contradictory propositions, and Christianity can't be true. Now here's where the folks who are saying things like that are demonstrating that they don't really have a deep understanding of the argument from evil. What they're describing is what's known as the logical argument from evil. There's two ways of making this argument. One's called the logical argument, and the other is called the evidential argument. Of the two, the evidential variety is actually a lot more common, and for good reason, because the logical approach, pretty darn easy to defeat. The logical argument from evil says exactly what these commentators have said, that there is a logical incompatibility, a logical contradiction between the Christian concept of an all-loving, all-powerful God and the existence of evil. Now, to be a logical contradiction, it needs to be literally impossible for two propositions to simultaneously be true. It's like me saying the proposition, I'm a bachelor, along with the proposition, I'm married. Those two statements contradict each other, so they can't both be true. That's the idea behind the logical argument from evil. It's saying that the propositions, the Christian God exists and evil exists, are like my two married bachelor statements. It's impossible for them both to be true. So why do so few people rely on the logical version nowadays? Because if that form of the argument depends on it being impossible for two statements to both be true, then all that's needed to defeat it is to show even the remotest possibility, no matter how unlikely, that they could coexist. In other words, if it's even possible that we are free creatures and that God wanted us to have libertarian free will, which it's obviously at least possible, then the argument falls apart. If it's possible, then it's not impossible. Simple enough, right? Now you may think it's not very likely, but that doesn't matter. In order to defeat a logical version of the argument, it doesn't need to be probable, only possible. That's why most atheistic scholars today don't use that variation. They shift to the evidential version. The evidential argument from evil says, okay, so maybe it's logically possible for God and evil to coexist, but given the amount and the severity of evil in the world, it's not likely. Now this version, you see, gets around the problems with a logical argument because it demands that the compatibility be probable, not just possible. But in doing this, it pays a price. You can't claim that the evidential argument is just an internal critique anymore. The moment it relies upon the amount and severity of evil in the world, it's assuming the existence of objective evil. But as I said in the previous video, you can't do that without God. In order for evil to exist, there needs to be a standard to define which things are good and which are evil. And in order for us to be under any obligation to actually behave according to the good, that standard needs to be a person to whom we are capable of owing moral duties. After all, we owe duties to people, not rocks. So you end up to right back what I said in the last video. You can't raise the argument from evil without assuming God exists. Either you end up losing the battle over mere possibilities, or you appeal to a moral standard that naturalism can't justify. Either way, you lose. For those folks who made these comments, I can only assume that you weren't aware of the evidential version, or the reasons why it is by far the modern go-to for atheistic scholars. Hopefully this clears that up. God bless.